A dark turn. I slouched at the bar, nursing my second whiskey of the night. The familiar sounds of clinking glasses and muted conversations washed over me, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of my empty apartment. It had been 3 months since Jess left, but the ache of her absence still gnawed at me daily. This dive bar, Pete's Place, used to be our favorite haunt. We'd spend hours here on weekends, playing pool and chatting with the regulars. Now being here alone felt wrong somehow, but the loneliness had finally driven me out of the house tonight, desperate for some human interaction, even if it was just small talk with the bartender. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, watching the light refract through it. Part of me hoped I might run into some old acquaintances here. Anything to distract from the endless cycle of memories playing through my mind. "Another?" the bartender asked, gesturing at my nearly empty glass. I nodded. "Sure, why not? It's not like I had anywhere to be tomorrow." As he poured, I gazed around the dimly lit room. Not much had changed in the months since I'd last been here. Same scuffed wooden floors, same faded sports memorabilia on the walls. The pool tables in back stood empty for now, but it was still early. My eyes landed on a woman sitting alone at the end of the bar. She looked to be about my age, early 30s, with long dark hair partially obscuring her face as she stared down at her phone. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place where I might know her from. The bartender set my fresh drink in front of me, pulling my attention away. I took a sip, savoring the burn as it went down. Maybe coming here hadn't been such a good idea after all. Every corner of this place held some memory of Jess. I could almost hear her laugh, see her leaning over the pool table lining up a shot. I was just about to close out my tab and call it a night when a man's voice behind me said, "Hey, you up for a game?" I turned to see a guy about my height with close-cropped hair gesturing toward the pool tables. He had an easygoing smile, but something in his eyes seemed slightly off. Sure," I replied after a moment's hesitation. What the hell, I thought. Isn't this why I came out tonight? To be social? Great, he said. I'm Mike. Tom, I said, shaking his outstretched hand. We made our way to an open table in the back. As Mike racked the balls, I selected a cue from the wall rack, testing its weight and balance. You come here often? Mike asked as he finished setting up. I shrugged. Used to. It's been a while though. He nodded. Yeah, I'm kind of new in town myself. Just moved here for work about a month ago. Still trying to find my way around, you know? What kind of work do you do? I asked, chalking my Q-tip. Oh, this and that, he said vaguely. Mostly freelance stuff. You want to break? I nodded and stepped up to the table. As I lined up my shot, I noticed Mike watching me intently. There was something unsettling about his gaze, but I shook off the feeling. I was probably just being paranoid after months of isolation. The crack of the cue ball scattering the rack echoed through the bar. 2 striped balls dropped into corner pockets. Nice, Mike said appreciatively. Looks like you've played before. I smiled slightly. Yeah, I used to play a lot. I circled the table, looking for my next shot. As the game progressed, we made casual small talk. Mike asked about good restaurants in the area, and I recommended a few of my favorites. He shared some amusing stories about getting lost, trying to navigate the city. Despite my initial unease, I found myself starting to relax. It felt good to engage in normal social interaction again after so long. I was lining up a tricky bank shot when Mike said, "So what's her name?" I looked up, startled. What? He gestured vaguely. The girl. The one you're trying to forget tonight. I stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. Mike chuckled. Come on, man, I can spot a guy nursing a broken heart from a mile away. The faraway looks, the way you keep zoning out between shots. Classic signs. I sighed, shoulders slumping. Was I really that transparent? Jess, I said quietly. Her name was Jess. Mike nodded sympathetically. How long? 3 months, I replied, but we were together for 5 years before that. Ouch, he said. That's rough. What happened, if you don't mind me asking? I shook my head. I'm still not entirely sure. One day everything seemed fine, and the next she was packing her bags. Said she needed space, needed to find herself. I took my shot, but the angle was off and the cue ball barely grazed its target. "Been there, man," Mike said. "Sometimes there's just no explaining it. But hey, plenty of fish in the sea, right?" He grinned and sank the 8-ball, winning the game. I managed a weak smile in return. "Yeah, I guess so." "How about another game?" Mike suggested. "Loser buys the next round?" I hesitated. It was getting late and I had an early meeting tomorrow, but the thought of returning to my empty apartment was deeply unappealing. "Sure," I said finally. "Why not?" As I re-racked the balls, Mike excused himself to use the restroom. I found my gaze drifting once again to the dark-haired woman at the bar. She was still there, now engaged in conversation with the bartender. There was something about her profile that nagged at me, like a half-remembered dream. Mike returned a few minutes later, 2 fresh beers in hand. "Thought I'd get a head start on that next round," he said with a wink. We settled into another game, the conversation flowing more easily now. Mike proved to be an attentive listener as I opened up about my relationship with Jess, how we met in college, our plans for the future, the gradual drift apart that I hadn't even noticed until it was too late. "Sounds like you really loved her," Mike said as he lined up a shot. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Yeah, I did. Still do, I guess." He sank his ball and straightened up, giving me a considering look. "You ever think about trying to win her back?" I shook my head. She made it pretty clear it was over. Blocked my number, moved out of state. I wouldn't even know how to find her now. Mike raised an eyebrow. "That seems a bit extreme for someone who just needed space. You sure there wasn't someone else involved?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. It was something I'd wondered about in my darkest moments, but had never wanted to seriously consider. I don't think so," I said uncertainly. "She never gave me any reason to suspect." Mike held up his hands. "Hey, I didn't mean to overstep. Just seems odd, that's all." "But what do I know?" He gestured to the table. "Your shot." I nodded absently, mind reeling. Could Jess really have been seeing someone else? The thought made me feel sick. I tried to focus on the game, but my concentration was shot. Mike easily won again. "Looks like the next round's on me," I said, forcing a smile. "Actually," Mike said, glancing at his watch, "I should probably call it a night. Early meeting tomorrow, but thanks for the games, man. It was good talking to you." "Yeah, you too," I replied. Despite my lingering unease about Mike, I found I was genuinely sorry to see him go. It had been nice to have someone to talk to, even if only for a couple hours. We shook hands, and Mike headed for the door. I turned back to the bar, intending to close out my tab. To my surprise, the dark-haired woman was gone. I hadn't even noticed her leave. As I waited for the bartender to run my card, a flash of color on the floor caught my eye. I bent down to investigate and found a small red leather bag, about the size of a large wallet. Must have fallen out of someone's purse. I picked it up, intending to turn it in to the bartender, but something made me pause. The bag seemed familiar somehow. Had I seen the dark-haired woman carrying it earlier? Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, I unzipped the bag. Inside was a wallet, phone, and a set of keys. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out the wallet and flipped it open. The driver's license inside made my blood run cold. Staring back at me was a photo of Jess. My hand shook as I stared at the familiar face. What the hell was going on? What were the odds of finding Jess's bag here, tonight of all nights? I quickly zipped the bag closed and shoved it into my jacket pocket, heart pounding. The bartender returned with my receipt to sign. I scrawled my name, barely able to keep my hand steady. "Everything okay?" he asked, giving me a concerned look. I nodded jerkily. "Yeah, fine, thanks." I practically bolted for the door, desperate for fresh air. Outside, the cool night breeze did little to calm my racing thoughts. I leaned against the brick wall of the bar, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had Jess been here tonight? Was she the dark-haired woman I'd seen? But that was impossible. She'd moved out of state months ago. And why would she have been here, at our old hangout? Unless... A chill ran down my spine as Mike's words echoed in my head. "You sure there wasn't someone else involved?" I shook my head, trying to clear it. I was jumping to conclusions. There had to be a reasonable explanation for this. I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over Jess's contact info. But what would I even say? "Hey, I know you blocked my number, but I just found your bag in our old bar." What gives? Besides, I realized I had no way of knowing if this was even her current number. With shaking hands, I pulled the bag out of my pocket and removed the phone inside. It was locked, of course, but when I pressed the home button, the background image made my stomach lurch. It was a photo of Jess and a man I'd never seen before. They were on a beach somewhere, smiling broadly with their arms around each other. The timestamp in the corner was from 2 weeks ago. I stared at the image, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. So it was true. There had been someone else. How long had this been going on? Had she been cheating on me before she left? Or had she moved on that quickly after ending things? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I felt sick, betrayed, furious. Part of me wanted to hurl the phone against the wall to destroy this evidence of Jess's new life without me. But a smaller, calmer part of my brain was starting to realize how strange this all was. What were the odds of me running into Jess here tonight, of all places? And then for her to somehow lose her bag without me noticing. It didn't add up. Something wasn't right. I took a deep breath, trying to think rationally. I needed to figure out what was going on. But first, I needed to get home. Standing around outside the bar all night wasn't going to accomplish anything. I pushed off from the wall and started walking towards my car, parked about a block away. As I walked, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had the distinct feeling I was being watched. I quickened my pace, resisting the urge to look over my shoulder. Just paranoia, I told myself. You're on edge from everything that's happened tonight. But as I reached my car, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding. The street was empty. I let out a shaky breath, fumbling for my keys. Get a grip, I thought. You're letting your imagination run wild. I climbed into my car and locked the doors, hands trembling slightly as I started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching from the shadows. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. There had to be a logical explanation for all of this. I let myself into the house, immediately heading for the kitchen. I needed a drink. A real one this time, not the watered-down well whiskey from the bar. As I poured myself a generous glass of bourbon, my eyes landed on the framed photo of Jess and me, still sitting on the counter. I'd meant to put it away weeks ago, but could never bring myself to do it. We looked so happy in that picture, taken on a hiking trip last summer. Jess's green eyes sparkled as she smiled at the camera, her arm looped through mine. How had we gone from that to this? I knocked back half the bourbon in one gulp, relishing the burn. Then I pulled out my phone and Jess's bag, setting them both on the kitchen island. Time to get to the bottom of this. I tried calling the number I had saved for Jess, but as expected, it went straight to voicemail. Her old voicemail greeting had been replaced with the default robotic voice. I hung up without leaving a message. Next, I went through the contents of her bag more thoroughly. Besides the wallet and phone, there was a tube of lipstick, some crumpled receipts, and a small notebook. I hesitated before opening the notebook. This felt like a massive invasion of privacy, but I needed answers. The first few pages contained what looked like work notes, meeting times, project deadlines, that sort of thing. But as I flipped through, my blood ran cold. There, in Jess's familiar handwriting, was my name. Below it was a list. Work schedule, gym routine. Favorite bar, Pete's. Still driving blue Civic. No alarm system. What the hell? With trembling hands, I flipped to the next page. There was a crude map of my neighborhood, with my house circled in red. This couldn't be real. Why would Jess have this information? Why would she need it? Unless... It wasn't Jess who had written this. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the strange sense of familiarity I'd felt looking at the dark-haired woman in the bar. It hadn't been Jess I was recognizing, I realized. It had been her resemblance to Jess, which meant someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make me think Jess had been there tonight. But why? What was the point of all this? As if in answer to my unspoken question, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. I jumped, nearly knocking over my glass. The number was unfamiliar. With a sense of dread, I opened the message. "Did you enjoy our game tonight, Tom? This is just the beginning. Sweet dreams." My blood turned to ice. Mike. It had to be. But how had he gotten my number? Before I could process this, another text came through. This one was a photo. It showed the outside of my house. The timestamp was from 2 minutes ago. Panic clawed at my throat. I ran to the front window, peering out into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing. Then a flash of movement caught my eye. A car was crawling slowly down the street, headlights off. As it passed under a streetlight, I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was Mike. I stumbled back from the window, heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of nightmare. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "You really should invest in some better curtains, Tom. I can see you perfectly." Oh God. Oh God, oh God, oh God. I ran through the house, shutting off lights and closing curtains. My hands shook so badly I could barely manage the drawstrings. What the hell was happening? Why was Mike doing this? How did he know so much about me? I grabbed my phone, intending to call the police, but as my finger hovered over the dial button, I hesitated. What exactly would I tell them? That a guy I met in a bar was slowly driving by my house? That I had a bag full of stuff belonging to my ex-girlfriend, who I hadn't seen in months? That I was receiving creepy texts? None of it was exactly criminal. They'd probably think I was drunk or crazy or something. The police would never believe me. A loud crash startled me, and I jumped, nearly dropping my phone. My heart was pounding as I spun around, looking for the source of the noise. But instead of the house, I found myself staring into a black void. Confusion set in as the void began to shift, my surroundings dissolving into fragments. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, sitting bolt upright in bed. My heart was racing, my shirt soaked with sweat. It took me a few seconds to realize I was in my bedroom, the morning sun streaming faintly through the curtains. It had all been a nightmare. I sat there for a moment, rubbing my face, trying to shake off the lingering fear. My phone buzzed on the nightstand and I flinched, glancing at it warily. Just an alarm, I realized, as I silenced it with a trembling hand. The details of the dream started to fade, but the emotions stuck with me. Unease, paranoia, betrayal. I took a deep breath, reminding myself it wasn't real. Jess wasn't here, Mike wasn't stalking me, and there was no bag with my name scrawled inside. Just a figment of my imagination, I told myself, though I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that it had felt so vivid, so personal. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and resolved to start the day. But as I walked toward the bathroom, I couldn't help glancing back at the window, just to make sure nothing, or no one, was out there. It was just a nightmare. Or at least, that's what I told myself.